Brody,
What's
what's
wrong?
going on?
What happened?
What about him,
okay? Is he okay?
Is he okay?
I can't say
What?
it.
At first glance, Alaskan Bush People sold a simple promise: 7 siblings, 2 parents, and a life carved out of the Alaskan wilderness, far from rules, systems, and consequences. But the system followed. It always does. What began in 2014 as a story about escaping civilization gradually turned into something far more grounded, with documented deaths, real arrests, and legal records that couldn't be edited out. The wilderness was only part of the story. The rest unfolded in courtrooms, hospitals, and headlines. Today, we'll talk about Alaskan Bush People, cast members who are either dead or in jail. Let's get going. Rise of the Wolf Pack and reality TV fame. When Alaskan Bush People first aired on May 6, 2014, on the Discovery Channel, it dropped viewers straight into a world that felt almost untouched by modern civilization. The series introduced the Brown family, living in remote regions of Alaska where temperatures routinely plunged below freezing, and isolation wasn't a concept, it was a daily reality. At the center stood Billy Brown, born December 3, 1952, in Fort Worth, Texas, a man whose past hardships shaped the philosophy he now imposed on his family: survival above all else. The Browns called themselves the Wolf Pack, a name that wasn't just symbolic, but functional. Billy and Amy Brown raised 7 children in an environment where teamwork meant the difference between comfort and crisis. The show documented them building shelters from logs and scavenged materials, hunting game with rifles and bows, and fishing in icy rivers where a misstep could turn fatal. They relied on wood-fired stoves, makeshift tools, and knowledge passed down through experience rather than formal training. Episodes often centered on practical challenges: constructing cabins before winter, securing food supplies, navigating unpredictable terrain. Seems impossible, doesn't it? Well, they did it. Early seasons drew millions of viewers per episode, making it one of Discovery's most watched reality programs during its peak years. The family's remote homestead, often referred to as Browntown, became a character in itself. Each structure they built, cabins, storage units, defensive perimeters, was designed to withstand Alaska's harsh conditions, where snowfall could exceed several feet, and wildlife encounters with bears or wolves were not hypothetical risks, but documented events. Billy's role extended beyond leadership into storytelling. He framed their lifestyle as a deliberate rejection of modern dependency, emphasizing self-reliance and adaptability. His children, Matt, Bam Bam, Bear, Gabe, Noah, Snowbird, and Rain, were trained in skills ranging from tracking animals to constructing boats. The show's narrative leaned heavily on these dynamics, blending real-life survival with a structured episodic format that heightened tension without abandoning factual grounding. By the late 2010s, the Wolf Pack had become more than a family. It was a brand tied to rugged independence and extreme living. Their rise reflected a broader audience fascination with off-grid lifestyles, but was anchored in specific dates, locations, and lived experiences. Speaking of experiences, there were some bad ones too. Early controversy, fraud case, and jail time. By 2015, just a year after Alaskan Bush People had surged into mainstream attention on the Discovery Channel, the narrative began to shift. What had been marketed as an uncompromising off-grid existence in Alaska suddenly collided with legal scrutiny. That year, Alaska state authorities opened an investigation into the Brown family's residency status, specifically whether they had legitimately qualified for the state's annual Alaska Permanent Fund dividend, a program that distributes oil revenue profits to residents who meet strict requirements for physical presence in the state. The stakes weren't symbolic. Each qualifying resident could receive over $1,000 per year, and the Browns had claimed these payments across multiple years. The investigation zeroed in on Billy Brown and his son, Joshua Brown, uncovering discrepancies between their claims and documented travel and living patterns. Court records revealed that between 2009 and 2012, the family had spent significant stretches of time outside Alaska, far beyond what the law allows for dividend eligibility. Residency in Alaska requires intent to remain and strict limits on time spent away. Investigators built a timeline using official documents, travel records, and testimony, constructing a case that suggested the Browns had knowingly misrepresented their presence in the state while continuing to collect funds. In November 2015, the case reached its turning point. Billy Brown and Joshua Brown formally pleaded guilty to multiple counts related to falsifying residency information. The admission confirmed that the public image of a permanently off-grid Alaskan family didn't fully align with reality during those years. Prosecutors outlined how the family had collectively received more than $20,000 through the dividend program under false pretenses. Sentencing followed quickly. Both Billy and Joshua were handed 30-day jail terms, a relatively short sentence but symbolically heavy given their public status. They were also ordered to pay fines and restitution tied to the improperly received funds. The jail time was served in Alaska. For a show built on independence and self-sufficiency, the image of its central figures behind bars created a sharp contrast that audiences couldn't ignore. The impact rippled beyond the courtroom. At the time, Alaskan Bush People was still building its identity, and the controversy threatened to undermine its core premise. Critics began questioning not just the residency claims, but the broader authenticity of the show itself. If the family hadn't consistently lived in Alaska during those years, what did that mean for the scenes presented as daily reality? The idea of Browntown as a permanent homestead came under scrutiny, with observers revisiting earlier episodes and timelines in search of inconsistency. Discovery Channel did not cancel the series, but the controversy forced a recalibration. Production continued, yet the perception had shifted. What had once been accepted as a raw, unfiltered look at wilderness survival was now viewed through a more skeptical lens. Viewers began distinguishing between documented fact and constructed narrative, a shift that would follow the show for the remainder of its run. Ratings remained strong in the immediate aftermath, but the sense of unquestioned authenticity had been fractured. The family's trials and tribulations did not end here. A life-threatening battle. Amy Brown's cancer. In April 2017, the story of Alaskan Bush People took a turn no one could script. Amy Brown, the quiet center of the Brown family, was diagnosed with stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer, a form of lung cancer that had already advanced beyond its earliest stages. Doctors delivered a blunt assessment. Reports at the time indicated her survival odds were extremely low, often cited at around 3%. For a family that had built its identity on resilience against nature, this was a different kind of enemy, one that couldn't be hunted, tracked, or outbuilt. The diagnosis didn't come out of nowhere. Amy had been experiencing persistent pain and fatigue, symptoms that escalated until medical testing confirmed the presence of a mass in her lung. Unlike the controlled dangers of the wilderness, cancer introduced uncertainty measured in scans, lab results, and timelines that shifted without warning. Stage 3 meant the disease had spread locally, often involving nearby lymph nodes, making immediate and aggressive treatment the only option. The Browns, who had spent years avoiding conventional infrastructure, suddenly found themselves navigating one of the most complex systems imaginable: modern oncology. Treatment began almost immediately. Amy underwent intensive chemotherapy and radiation, a combination designed to shrink tumors and prevent further spread. Chemotherapy cycles, often spaced weeks apart, brought side effects that were as punishing as the disease itself: fatigue, nausea, and weakened immunity. Radiation targeted the affected areas with precision, but it came with its own toll on the body. For a woman who had spent years living off-grid, relying on physical endurance and routine, the shift to hospital rooms and medical schedules marked a profound change in daily life. The family made a decisive move that year. Leaving behind Alaska's remote terrain, the Browns relocated to Washington state to ensure Amy had access to specialized treatment facilities. It was a logistical and emotional upheaval. The environment changed from isolated wilderness to structured medical care, where progress was tracked not by seasons or supplies, but by tumor response and blood count. The move underscored a reality that even the most self-reliant lifestyle has limits when faced with advanced illness. Throughout 2017, the battle unfolded in phases. Chemotherapy cycles were completed, radiation sessions continued, and regular imaging scans monitored the cancer's response. Each appointment carried tension. The family shifted roles. Survival skills gave way to caregiving, emotional support, and constant vigilance. Public updates shared through the show and media reflected cautious optimism, but the underlying stakes remained unchanged. By late 2017, after months of treatment, doctors reported that Amy's condition had improved significantly, and by December, she was declared in remission. The aftermath of remission didn't signal a return to normal life. Amy required ongoing monitoring, including follow-up scans and medical evaluations to detect any recurrence. Stage 3 lung cancer carries a known risk of relapse, making vigilance essential. The family's relocation to Washington remained significant, not just as a temporary measure, but as a long-term adjustment to ensure continued access to health care. The experience reshaped priorities, blending their off-grid identity with the realities of ongoing medical care. Within the narrative of Alaskan Bush People, Amy's illness became one of the most defining arcs. It shifted the focus from external survival challenges to an internal, deeply personal fight. Episodes documented hospital visits, family reactions, and the emotional weight carried by each member. Unlike earlier storylines centered on building shelters or securing food, this was a confrontation with mortality itself. A span of roughly 8 months that compressed fear, uncertainty, and eventual relief into a sequence that felt both immediate and prolonged. It was a reminder that even within a reality show built on extremes, some battles are universally understood and cannot be dramatized beyond what they already are. But not all battles are won. The Patriarch Fall, Death of Billy Brown. On February 7, 2021, the story of Alaskan Bush People fractured in a way no episode had prepared its audience for. Billy Brown, the voice, the architect, the man who had turned isolation into identity, died at the age of 68. The cause was a seizure, sudden and decisive, occurring at the family's property in Washington state. For viewers who had watched him navigate storms, predators, and decades of hardship, the finality of it felt jarring. There was no dramatic buildup, no prolonged arc, just a single moment that ended the central force holding the wolf pack together. Billy's life had always been framed as survival against impossible odds. Born December 3, 1952, in Fort Worth, Texas, he endured personal tragedy early, including the loss of close family members in his youth. By the time Alaskan Bush People premiered in 2014, he had already constructed a philosophy rooted in self-reliance, one he passed on to his 7 children. On screen, he wasn't just a father. He was the decision-maker, the strategist, the one who determined when to hunt, where to build, and how to adapt. But by the late 2010s, there were signs that the man behind the image was under strain. Billy had been open about chronic respiratory issues and declining health, conditions that became harder to ignore as the years progressed. The move from Alaska to Washington state, initially driven by Amy Brown's cancer treatment in 2017, also placed Billy in a different environment, less isolated but more revealing. Medical care was closer, but so was the reality that survival in the wilderness does not shield anyone from underlying health risks. When the seizure struck in early 2021, it wasn't in the wild expanses of Alaska, but on their Washington homestead, a location that had become central to the family's later years. Emergency response efforts were unable to reverse the outcome. The announcement of his death was made publicly soon after, confirming the date and cause. It marked the end of a figure who had appeared in over a decade of televised content and had become synonymous with the show's identity. You see, Alaskan Bush People had always been anchored by Billy's leadership. Without him, the narrative axis shifted. His children, Matt, Bam Bam, Bear, Gabe, Noah, Snowbird, and Rain, were no longer operating under a single guiding authority. Instead, they faced decisions individually or in smaller units, each adapting the family philosophy in their own way. The unified wolf pack concept began to loosen, not out of conflict alone, but out of necessity. Production continued after his death, but the tone changed. Later seasons, including Season 13 and Season 14, documented the family's attempt to move forward while processing loss. The absence of Billy's voice was noticeable, not just in dialogue, but in the structure of each episode. Where once there had been a central plan, there were now parallel paths. Some members focused on homesteading, others on family life, and some on personal projects. Billy's death also had legal and financial implications. As the central figure behind Alaskan Bush People, Billy Brown had control or influence over key assets tied to the family's livelihood, including their Washington state property, often referred to as North Star Ranch, business arrangements connected to the show, and proceeds linked to books and media. When he died, those assets became part of an estate that required formal management, documentation, and legal clarity. The most concrete dispute surfaced in 2021 when a former business associate, Robert Moghan, filed a lawsuit against Billy Brown's estate. The claim alleged that Billy had entered into an agreement promising 10% of future earnings from various ventures, including media projects tied to the Brown family. According to court filings, Moghan argued that this agreement dated back years and that he had not received the compensation he was owed. The lawsuit sought approximately $500,000 in damages. At the center of this process was Amy Brown, who took on a leading role in handling estate-related matters. As Billy's spouse, she became closely involved in managing legal responses, asset oversight, and ongoing obligations tied to the claim. Estate cases like this are rarely simple, especially when they involve verbal agreements, long timelines, and income streams that depend on television production, royalties, and brand value. The legal tension extended beyond just one lawsuit. Billy's passing raised broader questions about intellectual property and revenue distribution, particularly tied to Alaskan Bush People. While the Discovery Channel controls production and broadcasting rights, cast members, including Billy, were tied to contracts that determined compensation. With the patriarch gone, questions emerged about how future payments, residuals, or potential spin-offs would be handled, and who within the family had authority to negotiate or represent collective interests. Then there were the physical assets. The Brown family's Washington property, livestock, equipment, and structures built over the years of filming all carried value, both practical and symbolic. Ownership and control of these assets had to be clarified, particularly as different family members began pursuing separate living arrangements and independent projects. Unlike a single unified household depicted on screen, the post-2021 reality involved multiple adults with their own families, priorities, and financial needs. There were also quieter, less formal tensions that surfaced indirectly. Public statements and social media activity hinted at differences in direction among the siblings, especially regarding the future of the brand and lifestyle Billy had built. While not all disagreements escalated into legal disputes, the absence of a central authority figure meant decisions that Billy once made unilaterally now required negotiation or resulted in divergence. Some members focused on homesteading and traditional skills, while others leaned into digital content, merchandise, or personal ventures. But wait, there's more from where that came. Internal struggles and legal run-ins. The image of unity that powered Alaskan Bush People began to fracture long before cameras slowed down. Behind the survival builds and wilderness expeditions, personal struggles were already surfacing, and by the late 2010s, they were no longer confined to private life. The shift became visible through Matt Brown, the eldest son, whose trajectory diverged sharply from the family narrative. Once a central presence in early seasons, Matt stepped away from the show between 2018 and 2019 as he entered rehab for addiction. Matt's situation escalated beyond substance abuse into public controversy. In 2018, 2 women made allegations against him, triggering an investigation by the Los Angeles Police Department. The case drew attention because of his visibility as a reality TV figure, but crucially, no criminal charges were filed. The lack of prosecution didn't erase the impact. By 2019, he was no longer part of the show's active cast, choosing instead to live independently in Washington state, often documenting his sobriety journey through social media and YouTube, emphasizing recovery milestones and mental health awareness. As Matt's chapter unfolded, another would follow, this time involving Bear Brown, one of the most recognizable faces of the series. Known for his high-energy persona and survival enthusiasm, Bear's life off-screen took a legal turn in March 2022 when he was arrested on a domestic violence charge in Washington state. The arrest introduced a new level of scrutiny, not just on him as an individual, but on the broader image of the Brown family. Legal proceedings moved forward, and the case was ultimately resolved through a plea agreement, avoiding extended jail time, but formally acknowledging the incident within the legal system. The timeline of these events intersected with a much larger shift. After Billy Brown died, Alaskan Bush People lost its central force, and the once unified wolf pack began to unravel. The show shifted from collective survival to individual struggles, with seasons 13 and 14 focusing on emotional aftermath rather than wilderness building. Episodes became less frequent, and while Discovery hasn't officially canceled it, the series is widely seen as on hiatus. The siblings also went separate ways. Matt pursued sobriety, Bear balanced family life and online content, and others explored homesteading and creative work. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.